First of all, I want to thank Paula. Paula, I did understand what you said, and thank you so much for a nice, crisp introduction, and also getting to know you and meet so many other General Assembly friends, members. I really want to thank this for this opportunity to be able to talk to you about this very important topic. And before I begin, I just want to say that this is really just an overview of many things, so that we can have a discussion. And the discussion should continue beyond this session today, right? I would be sharing some facts, some information, and some of my viewpoints. And these are leading to what I would call food for thought, right? And so hopefully, let's continue the discussion in the coming time, right? So we all know Queens is a very diverse, but then there are times when I realize that many of us really uh, do not have the information about how did we get to be so diverse. And everyone is talking about that Queens is diverse, but sometimes it is very rhetorical. We just say it, right? And we celebrate it. So I want to go a little deeper into this, about how did we get here. So I forgot that I had a PowerPoint. So let me see if I can share. Okay, there you go.
Tim is gonna.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you so much. Yeah, I almost forgot. so, Tim, we can go to the next slide. Um, and yes, so how did we get here, right? So, New York City has always been diverse, even when Queens was not part of New York City, right? Because it has been a port city, and you would find many languages being spoken here. Um, so the question about diversity, you can say it has always been diverse. Even Queens has been diverse, and we can give many examples, right? But really, the kind of diversity that we are celebrating these days is, I would say, about half a century old. Um, and a big change happened in the 1960s, so that we can really call Queens diversity global diversity. And there are 2 points I want to mention here that help shape these kind of diverse conditions that we are living in. One is the Immigration Reform Act that was passed in 1965. And I'm calling it, and some scholars have called it, the unintended immigration reform. So, very roughly speaking, the immigration to United States of America before that was pretty restricted, and it was predominantly from Europe, right? There were other people coming here. Of course, African Americans have been here, and other groups from Latin America, Caribbean, and Asia were here too. But in terms of really the population as such, it was predominantly a European majority, right? And this changes in 1965 Hart-Celler Act. And why it has been called the unintended immigration reform is because the legislators did not want immigration to be from the entire world. They did not intend it to be like this. They wanted to open up immigration from certain European groups. But then, given the conditions, and like many of our public officials, they really don't understand the impact of these policies that they bring in, the legislation that they bring in. They just kind of did almost like a global language they used, and said this will not change very much the US population. And they opened up immigration to all countries, most of the countries in the world. And that ended what is called the national origins quotas. So till that time, USA had this policy that immigration would be restricted from most of the nations of different part of the world. So those kind of quotas were lifted, and a lot of American legislators and many other people were quite surprised when immigration starts changing in a few years. So by late 1960s, we see the change begins and immigration starts happening instead of Europe, right? To some extent, European immigration continued, but very soon it was taken over by countries from Latin America, Caribbean, and Asia. So it's almost like a complete reversal of US immigration that starts in the 1960s. I'm not going to say a lot about it uh, because I want to go to the other points, but please note that that immigration, global immigration, that was started in 1965 legislation has continued for more than 50 years and it's still ongoing with some very little changes. Okay, so this is the biggest immigration in the US history, what we have been seeing in the last 50, over 50 years. And it is not only very large in terms of numbers, but also the origins of the immigrants who are coming here. There's a very, very significant change. It's almost like a um, transformation of US immigration. Okay. The second thing I want to emphasize here is about the 1960s is that the country that the immigrants are arriving in is also changing, right? As we all know. And I'm mentioning the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, and many other kinds of identities. But this act, though it's very significant by itself, but it also represents a whole movement, the civil rights movements that were going on in the 60s, right? And that brings about a legal, a political, a social change in American society. That's historic, right? And the reason why I'm emphasizing this is that very often we talk about immigrants coming from all these cultures, but I think it's very important to recognize that the country that they are arriving in is also very different, where everyone, at least legally, should be treated equally, right? And so, I mean, I want to just add a little footnote here that as an immigrant, I really salute African American communities that stood up for this very, very basic civil rights for everyone. You know, so and also a lot of people like me, immigrants, who are not born in this country and who were not here at that time, we have benefited, like all of us. We also have benefited from this, but because we were not here, we did not know what had happened, what America was like before 1960s, right? So I want to salute, especially African Americans, for this opening up the country to these kind of possibilities of social justice and civic equality. So 1960s is a time of big change, and I just want to give you a glimpse of what the population was like in the 1960s, right? Uh, and I want to introduce, for those of you who do not know, Professor Roger Sanjek and his really classic book, The Future of Us All. So, if anybody is interested in knowing more about Queens and the diversity, I mean, this is something that we should all read and own. And Susie and I, we are students. We are very fortunate to be students of Professor Roger Sanjek. So he, in his book, The Future of Us All, I want to mention 2 points from this. He is talking about the history of Elmer's Corona and with all the different groups, including Native Americans and African Americans, actually the dwindling numbers of Native Americans in the 17th and 18th centuries, and then how segregated uh, African American communities were in Queens and what kind of challenges they faced. And the focus of the book is on two neighborhoods of Queens, Elmhurst and Corona, which he discusses in detail, right? So some of the information that he's telling us is about these two neighborhoods. Yet from that we can see how almost the whole Queens was going through. And even though neighborhoods are different, we all know the neighborhoods, not all neighborhoods are the same, right? So Professor Sanjak tells us that in the 1960 census, 98% of Elmer's corona was white, right? And when he says white, we all know he's talking about different white ethnic groups, right? White population was not and still is not homogeneous population, right? But that's how the census looks at it. And then, so you can get an idea what kind of demographics we had in Queens at that time, right? Um, and then Professor Sanjak talks about how immigration in the 1960s and the 1970s internationalized Elmer's corona, right? And these are, I'm quoting him. So, from that kind of demographics, we see the beginnings of global diversity. And I have no hesitation in saying that immigrants from all over the world have created these kind of global demographics in Queens, right? So, with that, I just want to say very quickly here, when we are going through this discussion, I think it's important to be reminded that why is it important to study Queen's diversity? And actually, this point came up in our small group discussion too, Susie. It was very interesting. Uh, but also, I want to mention that when Professor Sanjak is discussing Queens, he is also reminding us that what is happening in Queens is a trend, is a pattern, demographic pattern that we are seeing a in many cities of this country, but also all over the country, that the populations are becoming more diverse. The communities are becoming more diverse, right? So what we see in Queens is something we can learn from for anyone. What works in Queens? How can people with such global diversity coexist in this one place? So I think it's very important what we are doing in Queens, um, the lessons we are learning, and what examination we are doing for national and I would say global dimensions as well, because I think this is a major issue for our world really right now. How should we cross over these differences of religion and culture and race and really live as one humanity? I think so. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide, Tim. And so I call this section new demographics very clearly, but are they quantitative or they are qualitative? And by that, you have heard so much about the quantitative aspect, the numbers um, of the cultures, right? And how the demographics is so diverse, right? So I don't have to repeat it here, but just a quick snapshot of how a borough and a city is transformed, okay, in these 50 years, okay? In 2020, first just remember this is the world, and these are census numbers, these are approximate numbers I'm giving. And please pardon me if they are not accurate to the T, but it just gives you an idea, okay? So in 2020, we are talking about Queens as being approximately 25% white, 21% African American, 28% Hispanic, 27% Asian, and I purposely added in parentheses 47% foreign born. Okay, so these people are 47% foreign born are technically immigrants. And then if you think about the children, the younger generation who's living in immigrant households, you would have an idea how important this immigration is for our borough, right? And compare this with 1960 New York City. And I'm going to give you an idea about how New York City as such is changing. In 1960, New York City was 80% white, 15% African American, and then we didn't have very accurate numbers for Latinos, Hispanics, and Asians, and the populations were much smaller. And 20% of the New York City population was foreign born. Jump to 2020, right? 60 years later. New York City is 32% white, 24% African American, 29% Hispanic, 14% Asian. And I want to mention 37% foreign born, but also about 3% or more of biracial people. Um, And that's like a group that many of us kind of do not talk about, but it's a population that's growing, people who have more than one racial um, and cultural identities, right? And this is in a way a result of the cultural diversity that we are living in also, that we have a younger generation that, and this is like a lot of people don't know about this biracial identity, so I don't know how many of them are uh, putting them in the census as biracial, okay, but they're at least 3% or so. So what we have now um, is a borough where about half the people are foreign born, right? And you can see the demographics changing. What I also want to emphasize here, it's very clear that because of this ongoing immigration for 50 some years, right, we cannot lump all immigrants and immigrant communities in one box. It is not a homogeneous group, and you have many layers and diversity within the immigrant communities. I just want to mention a couple of them. One of them is that, as scholars have shown, that the post 1965 immigration is more diverse than ever uh, in terms of the occupations, the skills, the social class, the cultures. Um, so we have people coming to this country who are coming, from lower income groups, right? But also people who are highly skilled and highly educated when they're coming here. So there's a whole range of people. It's very hard to put all immigrants in one box and generalize about them, right? Also, there has been a pattern, there's a continuation of this process of what can be simply called family reunifications. And this is very significant to understand because immigrants, when they're coming here, um, the 1965 immigration law also allowed them to bring their families here. Okay, not automatically; they have to go through this very long process of immigration and all that kind of things, which I won't go into right now. But basically, what we see is that when immigrants started coming here, their numbers grew also because of family reunification. And family reunification is important is because this also leads to growth of communities. Okay, communities after communities you begin to see, and the earlier communities begin to grow over 50 years. They have grown so much, and within these communities you find all kinds of subgroups, you find all kinds of I would say traditions being recreated here, being transplanted to United States of America. So there is a definite growth of communities. Many of them are large communities, many of them are smaller communities that we may not know about, right? So in Queens, the interesting thing is almost everyone is here. You find some large communities and you find some smaller communities as well, right? I purposely put here is that while immigrants are quite different from each other, um, but there is one thing that unites them, and that is this, I would say, this dream. And it's a very important dream um, we can call it the American dream, right? And generally, traditionally, we think about American dream as doing well economically in this country, right? So you want to have, like, people arrive here, they want to have a house of their own, they want to be homeowners, they want to have a car, they want to have, like, all these kind of things, upward economic mobility. But you also find as they are living in this country, there is also this issue about what kind of country do they want to live in? What are the values of social justice, of racial equity? It's not enough to just say, you are doing better in this country, and so you are okay, right? So I feel this is really beginning to think about the so called American society and immigrants' place in this society. So what we have in these areas that we know in neighborhoods, and I just want to mention here, I was feeling so bad that I'm not talking about any particular communities specifically, because it's just very difficult to, because the diversity is just tremendous, and I'm sorry if I'm not mentioning certain communities here. But what it's I think it's suffice to say here that almost every community that you find, old or new, in Queens. There are communities that have been here for generations. There have been communities or people who arriving like yesterday here, right? And so you begin to see multi-layered communities and communities that are very diverse internally. And out of all this thing happening for so many decades now, we see also new group identities come up in this process. And this idea that immigrants belong to one culture, one homogeneous culture. I mean, I find that like so simplistic because these cultures are changing and these identities are changing as well. So, for example, you know, I mean, my own community, South Asian, right? This is purely an American construction. I mean, there is no such thing as South Asia identity in South Asia itself. This is because immigrants from countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, uh, and Sri Lanka and Nepal, they came together here and they said, we are all South Asians. Not everyone said it. Some people like me and some advocates said that, and we came together on issues, right? So you begin to see new identities come up. Latinos developing a pan-ethnic identity, right? Oh, okay. Let me go on to the next slide because we want to have a discussion about this too. Thank you, Tim. So what we are now seeing in Queens are populations that are what Professor Sanjay could call old Americans, means Americans who have been here for many generations, I would say, right? Long term populations. And these could be white ethnic groups, these could be African Americans, um, right? And we have the post 1965 immigrant group populations. They also are multi layered and very diverse, right? So, what we see in these 50 years is that Queens has moved from what was essentially a biracial society. And before 1960s, it was operating in a particular way also. I want to remind you about the pre-civil rights period as well. So from a biracial society to a multiracial, multicultural society. And this is a very, very dramatic change that has happened. And it is not something that it has been very slow. It has happened very quickly, and I think it is high time we take this very seriously and we see what has been changing with this. What kind of where do we want to take this multicultural, diverse society, right? So just to mention a few of these things. One, like most cities, and New York City was a leader um, in the entire country. New York City has become a majority minority city, which basically means that no one group, as earlier whites were the majority, right? If you put all the minorities together, they are the majority now, right? So this requires that we have to rethink race relations very seriously. And it will change a lot of things. Has that change happened already? I think we are in the process of it. So what does that mean, really? In every which way, where the jobs are, where, every which way, public officials, everything. Like who's running the city? Who's running the borough, really, right? Secondly, I want to raise this question about this classic thing in United States of America. It's called the nation of immigrants. But the issue for me is, can immigrants be treated as Americans, or they will remain only aliens? With the population of about half, 50% of Queens being foreign born immigrants, can we afford to treat immigrants as aliens? And I know that all of you will say, no, we don't treat them as aliens and all that. But there are many areas where immigrants are not considered Americans, really. Definitely not equal Americans, or their skills and their um, whatever, like it's not accepted as an American thing. They're still like foreigners, right? Um, so the next I want to say, it raises these issues about, again, in USA, there's thing about people assimilating in United States of America. And I find that issue very, how should I put it, very real, but also very problematic, because it really begs this question: assimilating into what culture, into what society are different groups assimilating into? Is there one mainstream, one American society where you can say, I am assimilating into? So there are, it's the answer is somewhere in between, and it's like a process that's going on. And we will discuss this more, I hope, because there is this issue about enclaves, that people having their own communities, and where do they remain isolated, and where do they interact with each other. So the reality is in between, really, somewhere, right? So I think we need to look at that. And remember, we are coming from a segregated society to this multicultural society. So where are we going with this? And I want to lastly mention this whole issue about civic and political participation. So um, Americans, people who have been here for a long time, and they have developed a system of how to have what kind of civic society we should have, what kind of political participation one should have. And it is important that immigrants learn that and do that, right, and practice that. But at the same time, I feel the way immigrants are being exposed to this, they may have a say of their own in that also, which is not what traditional American civic and political participation may be like, because immigrants are coming with their own ideas, some welcome, some not welcome, whatever it is, but they are bringing their own traditions and their viewpoints to this, right? And they're learning about American society, but it's a give and take. We cannot just say that it is a one way process, which assimilation generally is seen as a one way process, that immigrants come here and merge here into American society and lose their identities, basically, right? And so I think what we are going through right now is much more of an interaction, um, and a complex process of what new things should come up from um, this kind of interaction between different communities. I think there may be, I don't know if there's one more slide or not. Maybe not. Tim, is there one? Yes. Okay. So just I want to end by saying that we are moving towards a diverse society. Are we moving towards a diverse society? So what does cultural diversity mean to us, really? And we discuss that in our a little bit in our own small group as well, because I find that now that we have been talking about diversity for about 30 years, at least, like, I would say 25 years for a generation. And Professor Sanjak was the first person, I would say, who pointed out to what was happening in Queens, and studying it. So at least for a generation, we have been talking about it. And I want to say, one of my students said, Professor, what about the glamorous part of this diversity? Is there something more to diversity than just the glamour of diversity? And that really kind of touched the core in me. That some of the students, young people, also know that there is an outer superficial aspect of cultural diversity, where we say, yes, we celebrate cultures, and that is important, yes, and food, and that how different we are. But really, does it go deeper than that? Does it? And for me, the question is, does it take away the discrimination, the hate against certain groups? And I mean, what is the value in cultural diversity? Why are we celebrating cultural diversity? Is it just because we want to eat each other's food? Is it just that, or is it more of a value thing that we want to do? So there are many people who would say we want a colorless society. It's not important, that thing. And I am reminded again of Professor Sanjak's phrase that he used in a paper called, "We have to be first colorful. We have to recognize how diverse we are. What does it mean, diversity? Then we can move towards a colorless society." And there are issues of racial equity, social justice, mutuality. Do we really uh, can we ensure that in a culturally diverse place like Queens, we cannot have anti Asian hatred? We cannot have exclusion of immigrants just because they don't know the language or something like that, right? So I'm just going to end here and say that I think we are all ready to think about pathways to new leaders and new definitions of diversity that are meaningful and will take away some of the not only the challenges, but I would say things that take away from the real cultural diversity and not just the names name of it. Okay, so yeah, so that's it.
Wow. Madhulika, thank you for this foundation and for this very thought-provoking talk.